All right, today we spoke with Sarah Zach, who is a pollution prevention extension specialist.
This was really neat because she gave us things we could do. We talked about pollution prevention, but she gave us tangible things we could do instead of like we said in it, taking the weight of the world on our shoulders. What are some things we do to make a small difference? Microplastics, talked about that. Talked about the fibers. What was that? Plastic fibers?
Plastic fibers. We had no idea. We'd not heard of these. We'd heard of microplastics, but had no idea that these fibers are everywhere.
And so that was a really good conversation. We even talked about pharmaceuticals in the water some, and she kind of explained some things about that to us. It was a good conversation. It was really good being able to talk about the environment and what we can do and how that's a problem. Welcome to Superheroes of Science. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Sarah. We co-host Science from the Experts. Our guests are professionals doing cutting-edge science right now.
They're experts in their field discussing what they know best. So listen up and learn real science from real people.
Subscribe now and stay informed of our latest episodes and show your support.
Joining us today for Superheroes of Science, we're so pleased to welcome Sarah Zach. Sarah joins us as a pollution prevention extension specialist. So welcome to the show, and we are so excited to get started.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, where are you an extension specialist from?
So I'm with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, but I have a sort of strange dual appointment. So I'm affiliated with Purdue as well through the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant program.
Okay, perfect. And before we go into kind of talking about the microplastic side of things, which is something that we definitely wanted to talk about today. I know it's in the curriculum of a lot of schools, and it's in the news. Well, it's buried in the news these days, but it seems like it's not as in the forefront as it seems like everything I see is COVID right now.
Yeah.
And we're going through the alphabet. But so what does pollution prevention person do? What do you do?
What do I do? That's a great question. So it's my job to kind of educate the public, I guess, about pollution issues, and being affiliated with the University of Illinois Extension, that means that it's kind of my job to take the research that's coming out of our universities and make it usable and kind of translate it and make it palatable for public consumption. So, a lot of the research is very complicated and complex, and I try to kind of distill that down to what people really need to know about what's happening. And of course, this is all sort of related to pollution topics. So my program really focuses on microplastics and marine debris, unwanted pharmaceuticals through our unwanted meds program. And then we also work with the Great Lakes National Program Office of the US EPA to kind of look at the emerging contaminants research that they're doing and see, how it can be helpful to people.
Sarah's probably gonna yell at me later, but I'm gonna get off on a tangent now. And
sure.
But I'll blame you. So
let's do it.
Because you said something about the unwanted pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
I know I was at a store there locally, pharmacy, and I saw a thing where you could drop off pharmaceuticals and stuff. But I remember growing up, so I'd like to talk about this just a little bit, because I remember growing up, they're like, oh, if you don't use it, flush it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm showing my age at that point, if that's something that we haven't said for quite a while, but apparently that's something we don't want to do today. Could you explain what we should do, why we don't want to do that and all that?
Sure. I don't think you're showing your age too much. I think it wasn't that long ago that we were telling people to flush this stuff because that was the quickest and the safest way to get it out of your house. Poisonings were, the primary focus, I guess, of those disposal instructions. And so it wasn't that long ago, but we know now that there's been a lot of research that's come out over the past 10 or 15 years that have shown that these pharmaceuticals end up in our waters. Wastewater treatment plants weren't designed to remove pharmaceuticals. It's not the fault of a wastewater treatment plant or anything like that. They're simply, in many cases, not capable of removing pharmaceuticals from water. So they're in our drinking water, our rivers, our lakes at very low concentrations. And so to kind of prevent that and kind of rectify that for the future, disposal program has been started with many communities, pharmacies, law enforcement. I know West Lafayette has a great program through their police department that we helped. We kind of provided some assistance. We, as in Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, not me personally, because it predates me actually in this position. It's been a really, really successful program for a really long time. But yeah, these disposal programs exist now, and the best, I guess, the easiest solution has now been to incinerate these pharmaceuticals at EPA regulated facilities. Like, for example, the West Lafayette Police Department uses a program in Indianapolis where they burn the waste in a hazardous waste facility that's EPA regulated, and it's used to generate electricity. So it kind of takes this waste product and it turns it into power, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I didn't know that was the method of those products.
It's generally because the EPA regulates the the emissions from those, and they have, just like a power plant, they have scrubbers and everything that takes the harmful chemicals out of the emissions. That's generally considered the safest, way to do it. And so actually we just had a take back day in late October. The Drug Enforcement Administration sponsors Take Back Day nationwide, working with, again, pharmacies, police departments, community members to, get these drugs out of the environment and incinerated and disposed of properly.
Now, do we know what kind of impact it's already had? Or
yeah, most of the research has been on like aquatic animals, and it may be obvious to some, I guess, but because they live in water 24/7, they're seeing these impacts at a much greater rate. There aren't any demonstrated human impacts, like from drinking water. You would have to drink, like swimming pools full of water to even get like a Tylenol. So if you've got a headache, drinking a bunch of water is not going to do very much good. But things like antidepressants, birth control, some painkillers and things like that have shown some really detrimental impacts to aquatic animals. Frogs are changing sex, because of estrogens and things like that. And different aquatic animals aren't feeding as quickly as they should because they have things like Prozac in their system, the same kind of effects that these things, therapeutic effects that these things have on us. They're seeing those same similar effects in the aquatic organisms.
And then is there potential at some point for, if I'm thinking if a bunch of fish ended up being having contamination within them, would that be at a level that then we would need to worry about if we consume that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It kind of like, maybe we're hoping not, we want to prevent it type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of a thing. I don't think I've seen any research that's come out that has shown that pharmaceuticals are sort of going to cause those kind of effects to us. I don't know that we could consume enough seafood, let's say. But who knows? The short life of this research, I think, gives us a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know what the effects are going to be 50, 60 years from now. And so, these long-lived animals, like a lake sturgeon that's in the lake for 50, 60 years. And, is it accumulating these things and just accumulating them and accumulating them? Is that a concern? I don't know if we really have the answer to those questions yet, but I think they're important questions that need to be answered over time.
So pharmaceuticals is definitely a pollutant, obviously, that we can prevent. We can easily prevent, because now we see the take back days. Like I said, I was at the pharmacy like a week or so, 2 ago, and I saw the container right there. You just drop it in there. I'm like, cool. And,
they're great programs. And I should say too that, a lot of these issues aren't going to go away if we start disposing of our unwanted medications, because a lot of the medicine that's in our water is also from excretion. The percentage that's from what's thrown in the trash or thrown or flushed down the toilet is fairly small. So I think even if we 100% stopped throwing medicines away, we still have these questions that we need to answer too. I think that's important to keep in mind, that it's not just people throwing away their medicine that are sort of creating a problem, that this is a problem that exists anyway. And we can stop contributing to it, but we still need to figure out solutions about what we do about it.
There you go.
It's
I
very
always like
interesting.
the action item. What I can do.
Mhm.
One thing
Yeah, absolutely.
is stop. Make sure I'm not discarding it.
Yep.
But Sarah.
Yeah, I thought this might be a good time to bring it back though to microplastics.
That's what I was going to say. That's one type of pollutant, but another type
Yeah.
deal with is the microplastics, and you might have to explain that, just a little bit of background. What is a microplastic, and why do I care?
So they're more self-explanatory than you might think. A microplastic is a small piece of plastic. That's it. At its base form, it is literally a microplastic, a tiny little plastic. But the reason that we're concerned about them is that we're finding microplastics in places where we shouldn't be finding microplastics. We're seeing these tiny little pieces of plastic in in our waters, very similar to sort of pharmaceutical compounds, right? These are things that we are finding in the environment that aren't supposed to be there and are causing, some maybe some negative effects that we can see, and maybe a lot of unknown negative effects as well. But really, they're at their core, they're just tiny little pieces of plastic that can either come from larger pieces of plastic, kind of broken off from larger pieces of plastic, or can just be, made as small pieces of plastic.
Okay. Well, let's before we go into the consequences of it being there, can we start with how's it getting there?
Yeah, sure. So the microplastics are kind of, I think, unique in that it is an incredibly diverse group with a lot of different sources, and you can point to a lot of different places where these things are coming from. Unlike pharmaceuticals that are, we know exactly how these things are getting in there, right? It's pretty straightforward. But microplastics have a really wide variety of ways that they can get into the water. And I'll just sort of focus on the water because that's, my area of expertise. So as I said, they can be small pieces of larger plastics. So, if you see a water bottle on the ground, over time, that water bottle is going to kind of break into pieces. It might get bashed up against rocks. It might be out in the sun, wind, all sorts of different things. Weathering, what we call weathering, breaks the larger pieces of plastic down into smaller pieces of plastic. And so we see little fragments, and we see what we would call like a fiber or a line. So pieces of, long sort of skinny pieces of plastic that are broken, or that come out of other things.
Mhm.
We see pellets, which are either, I guess they can be, made to be sort of, I guess, used in the way that they're created. So like a face wash, that has those scrubbers that we used to see on shelves, right? We don't see them on shelves anymore, but they're still out in the environment. And then there's these things, and this is my absolute favorite thing to talk about when I talk about microplastics. They're called Nerdles or pellets, but Nerdles is a lot more fun to say. And these are the round plastic beads that are used to make molded plastics. So if you've ever gone to a zoo and you've seen like the Mold-O-Rama machines where you pick an animal and then it makes that animal for you, a lot of people have seen them, a lot of people haven't. When I give talks about this, I put pictures up and they go, oh, that thing, because I think when you see it, they're very like old time. Maybe I'm showing my age by talking about them, but they're very kind of old timey. But anything that's a molded plastic, right? My unfortunately, it's just blending into my background. My plastic cup here, right? This is a molded plastic. And so originally they were small beads, and they get transported on cargo ships, they get transported over land, and as you would expect, a tiny bead of plastic, they escape and they get out into the environment. So things like that. So they can come from a really, really wide variety of sources, but they end up in our water in a lot of cases.
Okay. So how can we prevent that?
Yeah, and that's where I think it's funny when you said that earlier, that you like to hear sort of those tangible things you can do. And
Yes.
Microplastics is one of those problems that when I talk about it, sometimes feels bigger than any one person. But there are so many different ways that people can prevent microplastics from getting into the environment that even if you're just doing one of them, you're helping the problem, which I think is really wonderful. There's a huge variety of ways that people from all walks of life and at all levels can kind of help with this problem. So one of the biggest sources of microplastics is fibers that come from your clothes.
Oh.
All of our clothes, most of our clothes are not 100% cotton or wool or natural fibers. They all have some percentage of polyester in a lot of cases in them. And that's a fiber, a plastic fiber, essentially. And when we wash our clothes, when we agitate our clothes, when they rub against one another, those fibers are shed and they end up in our wastewater. And then they go to
reason the polyester suits from the 70s should not have happened.
Banned. Although, it is so hard to find clothes even still made of 100% natural fiber. And in many cases, they're way more expensive and harder to source. So we're still seeing a lot of those polyester suits. They just don't look quite the same anymore. But those end up in the wastewater and then they go to the treatment plant. And just like pharmaceuticals, wastewater treatment plants weren't designed to remove microplastics. These fibers are so small and they do remove a huge percentage. I think they can remove 80, 90% of them, but we're talking about thousands and thousands of fibers with every load of laundry. So even a small percentage of those, for everybody's laundry, is a lot of fibers, cumulatively.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the microfibers are, I think most scientists would agree that microfibers are sort of the biggest concern right now because they're the most prolific type of microplastic. Okay. And so to cut down on those, you can take kind of simple steps, right? Things like fleece, which, we're in the Midwest, we wear a lot of fleece, right? We have a lot of cool weather, not cold weather, in the spring and the fall. And so fleece is really popular. So not washing your fleece as often, or washing it in even a pillowcase, or they do make washing bags that you can buy to kind of trap those fibers and kind of prevent that agitation. But spot cleaning it whenever possible rather than throwing it in the washing machine can cut down on fibers, immensely. There are also, the word just went right out of my head, like lint traps, essentially, for filters is the word I was looking for. Filters for washing machines, just sort of like your lint trap in your dryer, that will catch those fibers before they head to the wastewater treatment plant. And they're really neat. I would really like to get one for my home as well. And I do have some colleagues who have gotten them, and they just kind of clean them out, every couple of weeks. And it's handfuls of wet fibers, essentially, and then those go in the garbage. But those can be a little bit costly. They run around $100. You need to have someone who either has the technical knowledge or can afford to hire someone with the technical knowledge to install them. So, not necessarily feasible for a wide variety of people. You also have to have your own washer and dryer to be able to do that as well, right? A huge percentage of people go to laundromats and have shared laundry units. So that's not really feasible for a lot of people. But, any sort of steps towards these types of things, wearing more cotton and less non-natural fibers. We've been replacing rugs in our house. Rather than looking just for a rug that I think is pretty, I'm trying to look for wool rugs rather than polypropylene rugs, because I know those wool fibers are natural and the polypropylene fibers aren't. But, it's not simple. So there's other things you can do too. Simply switching to, reusables, even if it's one type of reusable, even if it's one Tupperware container or a glass reusable container instead of a takeaway container, even if it's using, silverware from home rather than plastic silverware, or a reusable water bottle rather than buying water. All those things help, because large plastics turn into microplastics. And so if you can stop using those large plastics, those single-use plastics, we call them, in any capacity, then you're also contributing to helping to reduce potential microplastics, future microplastics, right?
Is that why a lot of places got rid of the plastic straws?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, that it's so we use the term marine debris. I think it's pretty loose. Because in the Midwest we don't have marine, right? It's aquatic debris, right? But marine debris is kind of the global phrase that gets used, and straws are a large percentage of marine debris. You see a ton of straws washed up on beaches and on shorelines. There's a very iconic photograph of a turtle with a straw up its nose. I think it was someone in Texas, like around maybe in like the Galveston area, that found this turtle, and it kind of went viral. There's also a turtle with a six-pack ring around it too, sort of a similar thing, right? Have you seen that? I think that turtle was from Missouri that kind of grew with the six-pack ring around its midsection. Very similar, right? Those images speak to people and kind of spurred on some of this legislation that, that got municipalities to adopt, paper straws or ban or make it so that straws aren't automatic. You have to ask for them, and sort of we saw that reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all kind of a part of the same issue.
And that's what you don't think of. A lot of times you think of, oh, it's just an inconvenience to me. And we don't think about it's a bigger picture thing.
Right.
So
it's one little piece, but if everybody does it, then it becomes an issue, right? You it's short-sighted, I guess.
Well, I'm interested. So definitely, yeah, I think this idea of marine debris and reducing and finding ways to cut back on things like you were saying, washing your clothes and reducing those fibers, or using anything reusable, anything more than cutting down on those single use. But internally, or externally, maybe it's externally too, what are some of the risks then of being exposed to these microplastics?
Yeah, and that's, I think, where a lot of the questions are. So I think that's a timely question. And, with microplastics in general, kind of the cart got put before the horse a little bit. We found out, well, we didn't find out, but we kind of learned more about the scope of these things, and everybody went, this can't be good, let's ban stuff. And so, that's when we saw microbeads got banned, very early on in the discovery of microplastics, and it was in the Great Lakes, I believe, first. I think the timeline kind of goes that we found microplastics in the Great Lakes. Some Great Lakes states moved to ban them, and then the federal government said, don't bother, we'll just go ahead and do this nationwide. But we didn't really know anything yet about the harm that they could cause. And we still don't know a lot about the harm that they could cause, because, and I know I'm kind of a broken record saying this, but similar to pharmaceuticals, right? A lot of these things could be long-term, and we just don't have the length of the body of research yet, and we haven't had the time yet to figure it out. But we do know some things. We know that a lot of these microplastics can absorb other pollutants, right? Plastic in general can move pollutants around. And we know that organisms eat microplastics. Many, many studies have been done that have found these plastics in the guts of aquatic organisms. And so if they're moving pollutants in and they're eating them, then a couple different things are happening. One, it's taking up space in their stomach that should be food. So we have seen negative impacts from something that simple, that they're eating plastic instead of food, and it's non-nutritive, and they're not getting the nutrition that they need. And so, essentially kind of starving them. And then we're also seeing that they're moving pollutants, around in ways that we weren't expecting, and into organisms as well. Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, some of the folks at Purdue for Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, our director, Thomas Hook, our research coordinator, Carolyn Foley, and some other folks did a study looking at all the studies that had been done about microplastics to try to answer some of these questions about whether their negative impacts are really something we need to worry about. And they found that, where in a lot of cases there weren't huge negative impacts, in certain smaller organisms, these are having impacts on their survival, their reproduction, and things like that can really resonate up a food chain and impact an entire ecosystem.
And that's what I wonder, and that's what I'm kind of afraid of there, is that I would
Yeah.
be afraid of is okay, if now the smaller organisms we're starting to impact, then let's keep going up that food chain until maybe it's not impacting me physically yet, but it's sure going to. If it builds up, it would make sense to me.
Well, and not just that too. And I think one of the biggest things that I guess one of the things that I'm concerned about is more economic in nature. If you look at the Great Lakes and the fishery in the Great Lakes and the economies that are built on fishing in the Great Lakes and the tourism and the recreation. I mean, look at the Indiana National Lake Shore and, the national park that we now have, that's all dependent on a healthy Lake Michigan. And so if that food web starts to change, that could have real, net detrimental impacts that kind of resonate, not just to, sort of pollution issues or contaminant issues in us or in fish that we eat, but, to people's livelihoods as well.
Yeah.
That's something that we've been talking recently about, is how all these things are so interconnected.
Yeah.
We think of one variable, but there's so much it can impact and snowball through.
Absolutely.
Impact. But I love the fact that you're giving us things, possibilities to avoid those. It's look for it. I would not have thought at all, making sure that if I'm purchasing new clothes, try to go towards a natural product. So that'd be like what, a cotton or wool basically then?
Yeah, or I know you can buy a lot more things with hemp now too, hemp as well.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind with when you're trying to avoid sort of consuming plastic in general is the sort of environmental justice aspects of it too, because for a long time, I talked with people about these things. They're just like, oh, just buy cotton. Oh, just buy a reusable water bottle. Oh, just buy this, just buy that. And these are not solutions that are open to all people. Mm-hmm. And it's not just buy a reusable water bottle. Well, where are they going to fill it up? Do they have access to clean drinking water? Can they fill it up? And, or is there another issue that they're worried about with their drinking water? Do they have lead in their water? And that's a whole nother, issue that they have to think about. So I think it's important to talk about a breadth of options so that people can look for, that one thing that kind of suits their abilities and their lifestyle, to see that small way that you can contribute. And I know I'm only scratching the surface here too of things that you can do. There are a lot of different ways to avoid these plastics. One thing I didn't mention is plastic bags, just simply refusing a plastic bag and throwing it in a backpack or just carrying an item. Plastic bags are a huge problem. So that's another way, and I don't require you to purchase anything. Yeah.
If you just get like one thing, a lot of stores will ask you now, hey, do you need a bag for that?
Yeah, right. Like I'm going to my car, I can just carry it to the car, right? Yeah.
Where before they would just automatically always put it in it.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing more stores. I don't know if they're doing it just to save themselves money or to save
maybe. And I think that's okay. It's, win-win for everyone, right? If it saves you money, switching to paper bags is very expensive. And there's been some studies that have shown that it's not necessarily as environmentally friendly as we might think too, because it takes a lot of water and energy to produce paper bags. So, simply not giving people unnecessary bags is a much more cost-effective solution for everybody.
And I know my wife has a whole bag of bags in her vehicle that she takes it. Now I will say during recent times, there's some stores that wouldn't allow us to use reusable bags due to the COVID.
Yeah. COVID has really done a number on the strides that were being made to reduce plastic consumption. We went full circle right back into, think about no one could eat in a restaurant, so everybody was getting takeout. If the few people who do bring their own reusable containers for leftovers and things like that weren't allowed to anymore. I think about the waste that my family and I generated over the past 2 years just from takeout alone, and it makes me cringe. But we didn't have a lot of options, right? It was the middle of a pandemic, and certain things, there were bag bans and styrofoam bans and things like that were set to go into action, in 2020, and governors and legislators said, let's put those on hold because now people are going to need these single-use disposable things for safety, right? And that's totally understandable. But now we kind of got to claw our way back to where we were.
Right.
Yeah. So what other, with the plastics, well, I guess we started with pharmaceuticals, then into plastics. What other, and I love that we're getting some action items. So some things I can still think about and do. I might not be able to save the entire world, but I might be able to save one little thing.
Yeah.
And that's always been my thing with students, on the students and adults, that don't try to save the world. Don't try to change the entire world. Just change one thing in your life.
Yeah, I think that's a great
The
advice.
world will change.
Yeah, because it's too daunting otherwise, right? You can't think about all the wrongs. You just have to focus on the little things that you can do. And cumulatively, those things do make a huge difference. It might feel like you're doing something small, but if 100 people are doing that same small thing, that's a big impact, right? So you have to kind of not get bogged down in the scope of the problems and focus on, the fact that if you're making this small positive change, other people probably are too.
Yeah, and that's what I like. Everybody making their own small change and think about things.
Yeah.
Whether it is, like you said, if you're replacing something, like you said, think of natural products over the synthetic products. If you're just as simple as, it's, I know that Sarah and I bring our own containers to drink out of, and we have a water filter in our lab that we filter our water in the lab and stuff, so that we can do that. And so there's a lot of little things that a lot of us can do.
Yeah.
But I love that you point out, not everyone can do all these things.
Yeah, I think that's important to remember.
Do within your means of what you can do.
Yeah.
And
even if you can't do any of these things, talking about them with other people, right? Like spreading the knowledge is also a thing. You don't have to spend money or, inconvenience yourself if that's, a problem. Even just being aware of these things and mindful and talking about them with someone, that also does good.
Yes. And then
exactly that. Sometimes you might just tell the person that needs to hear it at the right time. That weren't even sure that was even an option. So so absolutely, I love that. Spreading that message, just because that might be the only time that person hears that. And so, we have to take whatever opportunity we can for outreach, right? Because it's, it's difficult. Outreach is difficult. You can't always meet people where they're at. So you just kind of have to take the opportunities as they come.
And we all need reminded. So it sure doesn't hurt to tell each other and remind each other.
No. And there's always something, right? Like, I know I could do better. No one's perfect. No one's doing all these things.
Yeah.
So with pollution prevention, what other prevention things can people do for different aspects of pollution? What behavior changes or something like that? I guess I'm asking.
I think one of the biggest things that I like sort of a general message that I like to leave people with too, is that every time you buy something, you kind of are voting with your wallet. I know that's a kind of a popular phrase, but it's totally accurate. The products that you're buying, where you're putting your money is kind of reinforcing. So if you're buying things that are contributing to the problem rather than things that could be helping the problem, that choice is saying something, right? Whatever that choice may be. And so I think being mindful is important, that, the choices that you make say more than just that exact thing, right? You're reinforcing sort of, buying something in a glass jar versus buying something in a plastic jar, right? Like if I have the choice, I'll buy something in a glass jar because maybe that puts pressure on the other company to switch from plastic to glass, which is much more recyclable, reusable, things like that. So I think that's an important way to think about it, that every dollar you spend is a vote, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's a great way to think about it. And not only the dollar you spend, sometimes it's the dollar you can't spend that you remind people of.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask. Go to a store manager and there's no options, they're environmentally friendly at all. Say, well, I'm actually looking for, glass containers for my reheat or for the storage, and do you have those? And if enough people ask, they're going to be like, wow, the market is there. I'm missing the mark.
I'm missing an opportunity. Right. right? If you don't let people know that you're interested in these things, then they don't know that there's a market for them. Absolutely.
And it's in options. Like, I don't know how many times for years, for me, I didn't want a bag because I don't want to, I get tired of the bags sitting around at home. I mean, we have an entire cabinet thing.
Bags of bags, right?
Yeah. I just didn't want
They
them.
make plastic containers to hold the plastic bags.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I just, for years I didn't do it. I wasn't, admittedly, I wasn't refusing the bag to save the world. I was refusing the bag to save my clutter. And so, but I keep doing that now regardless, because it's like, no, that's one less thing that we don't need that.
Yeah.
And as simple as I see people when they go in the stores, it's like, oh, we all ate out not too long ago, and somebody went up to get a fork. And did they take one? No, they took like 4. Only one person in our group needed a fork. So when we were done, there were 3 plastic forks that had to be thrown away because somebody grabbed them. So not grabbing those extra things, I think, would help eliminate a lot. I don't know how many restaurants I've seen where it says, just take the napkins you need. Because you always walk around, you see piles of napkins for years and stuff that people would do. I think we're being more conscious about these things as a society, but we all need reminded.
Yeah. And I think that's where the straw thing really comes in too. I think that's, it's always been sort of force of habit that, you go out to eat and the wait staff just gives every single person a straw. Well, if you just change that to, do you need a straw? Would you like a straw? Some of those people are going to say no. And then we've saved those straws. Because even if you don't use it, if they put it on the table, it's getting thrown away.
Yes.
It's just as if you used it, right? Just like those forks,
right.
They're sitting on the table. They can't be reused. They have to get thrown away. Or like that pile of napkins you leave that, someone will use this. The person who comes to the table, they don't. I don't want to use napkins that someone left there. I don't know what they did to those napkins. I'm getting my own.
Yes, we did. We used to leave.
Yeah, I think everybody's.
I'd grab a snack. The kids needed 2.
Yeah.
It's like, then, someone will leave these. But in reality, I wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you mentioned kids. I think that's important to keep in mind too, is that
Recycle children.
I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle. I think that when you have kids too, life gets a lot harder, and you have to kind of, I just had a baby a little less than 2 years ago, right at the start of the pandemic. And we kind of changed our way of thinking a little bit because you're tired. Things are harder. And so you have to kind of forgive yourself that like there's high points and low points, and there's good times and bad times. And so sometimes you just take the extra forks because you don't want to count and you just want to grab some and get the heck out of there.
Yep.
Right. Or fine, I'll take the straws. I'm having my baby's having a meltdown. Fine, just put it down. So you just try to do better,
But when I do that, I take them with me. It's like I have in the glove compartment of all of our cars, I have napkins that I don't know how many times it saved us.
Yeah.
Even if it's just, there's a couple of extra that we put on the table, I generally put them in my pocket to take them with me so they're not thrown away, so we can still use them. And so I don't have to buy a roll of paper towel sometimes.
Right. I saw a joke recently that's a Midwestern thing, which I find it hard to believe. Everybody has to have napkins in their glove box. It's just good business.
It's
just smart.
I love that you're mentioning this too, that you just kind of take as you can. And I think that even gets to when you have if you're not able to do this, you can still maybe encourage someone else to try it, or still have those discussions. But then also, like you're saying, the highs and the lows, being able and to make those decisions, or forgiving yourself when that's not. But I know also, as you mentioned, kids, and I know with my own kids, I had heard about this. I stopped drinking with a straw. I just, as many times as I could make that choice. And I remember when I first started doing that, my kids just thought I was nuts. Like, Mom, what on earth? And now 2 of my kids have started kind of feeling like, we don't need the straw. We can just, so I think
that's great. You're modeling that behavior for them. That's
so
wonderful.
I think, showing them that, because they've never seen it. And I think for me too, as an adult, I've never seen that behavior modeled, but if I make this change and can show anyone else that, it's a possibility, you don't have to do it every time, but it's a choice you could make.
Yeah, absolutely. And when your kids are little, do you want them to use a straw? Absolutely, because it's either that or they end up pouring it all over themselves, right? So you take the straw when they're little, like things like that. I think one of the things that I think, kind of working in pollution prevention and talking with people about all this stuff, one of the things I always want to make sure that I tell people is that there's no hard line to take about any of this stuff, right? Like, I don't want to be seen as a person who is telling everyone all these horrible things that they're doing and all these changes that they have to make and all this money that they have to spend. And I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want someone coming to me and saying those things to me either. So I think that, kind of couching it in what's possible and what's feasible and what's realistic and what you want to do is important, right? With understanding that like anything you can do is positive. And so the more positive things you do, of course, the more good you're doing. But we'll take whatever we can get,
That's a big thing with any environmental topic. It's
Yeah.
a doomsday thing.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about pollution impact to the ecosystem and how each level impacts the next and how detrimental it can be to all life on Earth, basically, it's really easy to kind of get in that doomsday rut and feel like I can't do anything. Oh, well, we're going to die. Probably get hit by an asteroid anyway. And just
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked for Sea Grant for about 10 years, and I started out working in invasive species. And I used to start my talks saying, like, this is going to be super depressing. Sorry. But, that's kind of what it is. But I would try to end it on here's what you can do. Right. And then I moved into talking about, more chemical pollution and things like that. And, same thing. This is going to be really depressing, but we're going to end up, hopefully leaving you feeling a little bit more empowered about what you can do about it. So it is kind of doomsday and depressing, but then we kind of, pull them back in and say, but, here's those little things that you can do.
It's I think the big thing is people just, I just say someone's listening, don't take the world on your shoulders.
No, yeah, absolutely.
But just think of the small changes you can make to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
That's the simplest I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Science from the Experts from Purdue University Superheroes of Science.
If you like this episode, subscribe, give us a positive review, and share the love. Boiler up!
Hammer down.